Hello and well met. This is Layron with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today we're going to do episode 2 for the conversion series for the Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth. So, doing research on this as I was preparing to do this, I was going to use these maps here, this Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth. They're really high quality, but I might actually rescind on that. It depends on how the conversion process goes on the back end. So when it comes to the maps, which will probably be the next thing I tackle, I'm going to have to figure out what to do with this or just use the traditional maps. But essentially, these are really big maps, and I had to shrink them down to half the size because they are of a print quality, and that would be much too large for Fantasy Grounds. So that's something you have to consider when you're putting artwork into Fantasy Grounds. You really don't need anything too much over 2K, so like 2048 by 2048. These are actually about 4 times the recommended size. When I shrunk these down to a smaller size, I even did it mathematically, they didn't scale properly, and when I try to put them in Fantasy Grounds, they look kind of crazy. So I'm going to have to figure out something else or a different way to convert these. But today we're going to focus on NPCs, and that's kind of what I typically go after. Is I'll either do the maps and the art, or I'll do the NPCs because that's the most work. So if you're going to do a project like this, while you have the ambition and the energy, it's better to start off with some of the more difficult, challenging, time-consuming things. The other things are a lot easier to do and don't take as much time. So the NPCs is probably the number 1 or number 2 thing that takes a lot of time in Fantasy Grounds. The other thing is the images and maps. Those are the next big time-consuming element. So it really depends on how much time you have and what your project is for. So another thing I wanted to redefine here is the difference between an adaptation and a conversion. So a conversion could cover a lot of different things, but essentially you're just taking content and copying and pasting it out of another medium, whether it be PDF or website. An adaptation is a little bit different in what you're doing. So you're not only putting it in Fantasy Grounds and converting it over, but you're also changing it. So you're going from like 1st edition to 5th edition, or you're going from Pathfinder to D&D or something like that. So that's a whole nother set of potential issues or time. So if you're going to do a conversion and it's from an older rule set to a newer rule set or vice versa, it can take a long time. So just kind of keep that in mind. If I was doing a straight D&D 5e conversion that goes from 1 to Fantasy Grounds, that would be a lot easier. But in this case, I'm actually converting not only the content into Fantasy Grounds, but also from 1st edition to 5th edition. So in this particular case, I'm going to be taking the 1st edition creatures and monsters and NPCs and converting those to 5th edition and then putting them into Fantasy Grounds. So that's a whole nother step that's involved. It can really get time consuming if you're going to do that. So just kind of keep that in mind. So if you have a lot of older homebrew content that was done in 1st, 2nd, or 3rd edition, or perhaps you have an old adventure that you want to convert, just kind of keep that in mind. You can wing it, especially if it's just for yourself. So I am going to be adding and adapting this particular adventure to my taste. So this wouldn't be a commercial product release. However, if I was doing this professionally and it was going to go on the DM's Guild and then on the Fantasy Grounds, it would be a lot more cut and dry. Wouldn't have a lot of room for customizations. So you got to kind of think about the scope of what you're doing. So today I'm going to mostly focus on the D&D NPC stat blocks. So there is a tool for the 5th edition rule set that will give you a quicker run at putting those into the rule set. So I'm in the NPC data area, which is over here in campaigns. And I made a group or a header. So this is called the Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth NPCs. And this group here is something that you want to make. So whenever you create a new data entry or a new section, you want to make that group, especially if you plan on exporting this later. So that's an important aspect of doing conversion work, and it's just a good habit to get into. You don't have to do that, but what will happen is all your work will be in this uncategorized area, and when you go to export it later, it can be kind of messy. So you want to put it underneath this particular group, whatever you end up calling it, and then kind of make that consistent throughout all the different data types that you work on. So we're mostly going to focus on NPCs. I was going to do the artwork first, so I got kind of discouraged by the map situation because I was going to knock out all the maps, and then I was going to do the tokens and, you know, some of that stuff. And then the other thing to consider is now that the new version of Fantasy Grounds is out, and if you want a more immersion for the particular adventure that you're doing, you may want to consider creating the assets for the 3D map view. So that could be something else that will add to your time. So instead of just having pogs or top-down tokens, you now would make a standee or one of those full-length character images. So that's something that you'll have to decide if it's worth your time or not. But I'm thinking I might do it. It's going to be a lot of extra work, but I think in the long run, it will be worth it. The other thing about this conversion or adaptation that I'm doing here is this is the full adventure. There is a tournament edition, and I believe that in about a week or two, the official D&D 5e version will be out, and that will have a shorter, abbreviated adventure for, you know, short adventures to be ran. And it's got the tournament rules, so you score points and that sort of thing. But I think the one I'm doing now is going to be the full conversion. And the reason I'm doing that is because I prefer that the GM have an option to abbreviate it or run the full thing. So I'm going to, you know, basically stab myself in the eye and do the extra work that's required. And that's something you have to commit to if you're going to do a conversion for yourself or for, especially if it's a big commercial project. The other thing I recommend is if you're in the middle of a project and Fantasy Grounds does a major update like it just did, I would not update it until you're done. So if you're working on something and then all of a sudden there's a bunch of new updates, I think I would refrain from updating if you can. So what I suggest is you have a separate computer or a separate account if you can afford it, and use that account to do your conversions, and don't update at all until you are done. So I wouldn't do anything big or a big project if I knew, or I wouldn't update, in other words, if I knew that Fantasy Grounds was going through this big change. So I would refrain from updating my development account and keep continuing to develop and then update and then see what breaks, instead of doing half of it, then finding out you have to go back and redo a bunch of stuff. I don't think so. So I think it would be a little bit more wiser to update your project after you're done. So that's my advice to anyone that does any of these kind of conversions, especially if you're doing it professionally, is just have a simple, basic Fantasy Grounds account that's really not your GM account or your player account, and you just use it for conversions. That's my advice. So I would just get a basic license, even if it's a subscription, and then build all your content with that and have a separate email for it and all that stuff, because that way it's not tied into your campaigns, your games, and you're not running extensions and all this other stuff. So that's kind of a tip that you might want to think about if you're going to get involved with doing official conversions for Smiteworks or for a publisher. So in this particular case, we're going to be doing some conversions. So I want to take a look at, this is the original PDF, and I'm actually starting in page 1. So I'm going to go through this entire module and pull out all the NPCs and monsters. So I got to go through here and make a list of all the different creatures for this adventure, and there's a lot. And there's even NPCs like, you know, like this captain here. There's a ton of monsters in this adventure. And some of this original artwork, I might keep that. I might put that in the adventure, but then also make like a cool colored version. Like maybe I'll take this and use some of the Fantasy Grounds tools to recolor some of it. Maybe I'll add just a touch of green for the trees and a little bit of brown over here, just to kind of give it a little bit more life. And then when you go through this, you kind of get an idea of what you want to do. So here's the gnome lair. So this is the original map. So I might just end up keeping this one and just kind of recoloring it. The one that I had wanted to use earlier was from this particular adventure, or this thing that was on the DM's Guild, or this was on, I think it's on the DM's Guild too, but this is a really nice high quality version. The only problem is it's too nice. It's like way huge. The map itself is gargantuan. So I might have to rethink how I want to do the maps. So it might be better if I just use the classic one if I still want to retain that classic feel. But it's going to have 5e rule set, so I don't know if that's going to really make a difference or if it's going to help or not. But I definitely want to keep these little art pieces in here. That's something that I thought about, that I definitely want them in there even if I don't use them. And then this stuff here, going through this adventure, this is 70 pages, and I believe the tournament version's like 40 pages. So this one's a lot more involved. This includes the lead up and the wilderness adventures all the way up to when you get to the caves. I think the tournament one starts right at the cave. So don't quote me on that. I don't remember, but basically this has a ton of NPCs. I mean, almost every single thing here has an NPC. So what I got to do is go through the roster or the list and check to see what's included, what stuff I need to do. Or I can go to the the Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth. This is a conversion guide, and this has already kind of done some of that work for you. So if you want to follow this is another good way to do it, which may make it easier. And it gives you kind of a breakdown of the visuals, the random encounters, the explanation of the NPCs and such. And these are in 5th edition. So what they've done is they've gone through and did a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And then they just put all the creatures, the items, all those sort of things in kind of a list view. So it's a lot easier to do this. So I might use some of this to create. But here, again, are the monsters. So you can copy and paste these and grab the stat blocks for them and not have to do the conversion yourself. So a lot of this is kind of already done. So if you don't want to do all that extra heavy lifting that I'm attempting, then this might be something for you. So this is also like a $3, $4, maybe $5 item. And then it has special items in here, but it only has some of the rare or the kind of the uncommon or not so well-known monsters in it. So this could be something that would help you with unique creatures, but if it's something out of the SRD or something that is already included with the D&D 5e rule set, then you won't have to recreate those necessarily. But I myself am going to recreate everything, and that's going to take me a long time. But I'm going to take you through the process of how to do this, because this is an important function of Fantasy Grounds to learn, especially if you want to do conversions or you want to customize something, or perhaps you want to adjust something. So let's go back to Fantasy Grounds and come back in here, and I wanted to show you something. So in the modules area, the only things I have loaded are the SRD data. I don't need extensions. I don't need a bunch of other stuff. If you're going to make a 5th edition adventure and you want to use the monsters that are already there, go for it. If it's your own personal project, but if this is a homebrew world that you want to create from scratch, then you only want to use the SRD. If it's for you and your table and personal use, you can pretty much use whatever you want. So what I'm going to be doing is recreating stuff I probably don't need to, but I want to make it in the likeness of how I want it. I don't want the data necessarily from the conversion guide or necessarily from the player's handbook. I want it set up for me, so when I run a game, it's going to be a lot easier on me. So I'm going to do the work ahead of time, do a lot of the extra lifting, heavy lifting up front. And when you go to run an adventure like this, it's going to be so smooth and so easy to run that you're not going to have to be flipping through different data and trying to figure out what's what. And have everything linked together, and have all the notes in there. So if I need to, I have that information right there in front of me instead of digging through the adventure, because that's usually what you end up doing if you're not familiar with the content, is you'll end up going through a bunch of books and having 20,000 books loaded just in case. That's kind of what will happen when you first start. You don't really know the content, you're still kind of feeling it out. But once you've done a couple conversions and you know the content really well, it makes it easier to run. So by doing that extra work, I'm not only practicing with Fantasy Grounds, but I'm getting to know the content. And I think that's an important aspect of being a game master, but also a game designer. So you want to kind of know the content. So that's something that you may want to visit, or maybe you don't have time for it. But nonetheless, you can always wait for the D&D 5e official copy to drop and just use that. I'm going to actually do the heavy lifting, and I want to show you guys how to use some of these tools. And we're going to have probably about 10 episodes. So this one is going to be mostly NPCs. So without further ado, I have the NPC window open here. This is actually part of the D&D 5e rule set. Down at the bottom here is this hamburger menu. So this is the import dialogue context. And I've done videos on this before, but if you've never seen this, this is a lifesaver if you know how to use it. The problem with this is that the text that you're grabbing has to be in the correct format. So you can grab stat blocks from D&D Beyond, it'll work in here. Or if you grab something from a PDF or a website, you have to massage the data. You have to kind of tweak it. So I would suggest using something like Notepad++, because that's going to give you a bona fide text editor, which is going to let you edit out any problems and make sure that the format is correct. So that's what you use, the bona fide text editor, not Windows Word, none of that fluffy stuff. You just want a basic text editor. And when you get the text from a PDF or from another source like a website, you're going to have all these double spaces in there, and there's probably some characters that you didn't notice. There's carriage returns, which is when you hit enter, you get a carriage return in the wrong places, and sometimes the wording's wrong. Like this multi-attack here, it should have a period after it. Maybe it'll have a semicolon. Or this bite action will just say bite and it'll give you the damage, but it doesn't give you everything else. I've seen that in different products. So if it's not formatted to the exact text formatting that's required, it's going to be very difficult to use the import tool. Then you might as well just do it by hand. So what I've done is I've taken a program like ChatGPT, for instance, or you can use any other AI program, and I gave it some parameters so that I can use it as a tool to help me organize text. So these things here are all stat blocks that I converted from 1E to 5E. And let me tell you, it fought me like no other. It did not want to do it. It was saying that it was trying to say that it wouldn't do it because either because they thought it was copyright or because I don't know, it was fighting me though. And I had to really force it. And I don't know what was going on, but I got it to work finally. I just had to reword my requests. So some of the things that you're going to see, like for instance, it made this, and this looks pretty good. This is, this is a decent attempt here at making the NPC. So what we're working on here in the actual PDF is this patrol that is part of the adventure. In the beginning, there's like 3 or 4 different patrols in the wilderness, and it gives you a roster of all of the NPCs that are a part of that particular piece of the adventure. So up here, after this map, you basically have your setup, your DM notes. It talks about the map here, and then it talks about the movement rate, like how far you can move. It's got a hex, and then it talks about horses, and then like your notes for preparing to play. It talks about survival, like food and hunting, which is kind of cool. That a lot of adventures don't do that anymore, so I kind of like that. And then it gives you some pre-gens, which I am going to build these. So in case if I want to do like a quick adventure, to test it out. I am going to make all those for this particular adventure, just so they're there if I get people that want to play and they don't want to spend 2 hours making characters, and we could do that. And let's see what else. So this is just kind of your forward, but then as you get down in here, you get in this wilderness encounter. So the border patrol, there's a couple of them. So there's the Ketites, there's the Paranlanders, and looks like maybe one other. I think there's an elven one, but nonetheless, there's a roster of different patrols. So I'm focusing on this one patrol to test it out. And so I've made all the stat blocks for these items. I did not know that these war horses were not part of the SRD. So that's something that I was kind of checking to see, if which stuff here is proprietary and whatnot. I'm not too worried about this because this is not going to be released to public or distributed. However, if I was going to sell this or make it for, for sale on the DM's Guild or something, I'd want to pay attention to that. So that's something that you have to kind of think about when you're doing conversions. But nonetheless, this border patrol is made up of probably about 6 or 7, maybe 8 different stat blocks. So I took this information, I copied and pasted over into ChatGPT, and the tool that I use actually has the parameters and the formatting that I want it to use. And as you can see, I used my cap today. So I can't use this tool until 4:30 p.m. So that's something you got to watch when you're using these kind of tools, because they often have limits. This is a paid account too, but you're only allowed 40 iterations per every 3 hours, and that's to keep the server load down. But I'm going to go back up here, and I got all those done today. I kind of went through ahead of time, and I asked for these stat blocks. And the type of thing that I was getting initially, I want to show you this, because this is something, if you're going to use AI tools, this is something you're going to fight. So initially, I had asked for this information, and it was giving me whatever, so it wasn't giving me a good stat block. So this is kind of what the information looked like initially, which is kind of a repeat of what's in the adventure. So that's okay, because it organized the stat blocks that I need to make. So that was okay, because I just had a real basic list here of all the different stat blocks, which was fine. So then I said, okay, convert it to D&D 5e NPC stat blocks, use the template that I provided, which is baked into there. And I said, create the captain first with the appropriate stat blocks. So this is what it made. This is correct. So this part here is right. This part here is correct. This table will import, it will ignore the formatting here, because actually Robert Aducci and I had figured that out together. And then these things here are correct. And then you have traits, but the only thing that I didn't like here was these bullet points. I didn't want those in there, because that can throw off the parsing tool. And the bold letters, I don't need that. I just need plain text. So I said the stat block, blah, 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 and then I just said that it doesn't follow my custom knowledge template example. So it was just doing whatever it wanted to do. So it went back and rewrote it. So it did it in this format, which is right, but it doesn't look right, because it's just kind of, it looks like gobbledygook right now because it's not formatted right. But then I noticed that it may or may not have been suitable for import. So I'm going to try it out. I'm going to show you guys live. So I'm going to take this information and I'm going to hit just copy. I just copied this text. This is what was generated after I'd fought with it for a couple times. And you go into Fantasy Grounds and hit Control V for paste. And that looks right. The only thing I could say is that this space wasn't there. So that could be a problem. And then if it's not in the correct format, it could break the parsing. So what I'm saying is one extra space or an extra comma or something out of place could break the parsing. So that's something that you got to kind of watch when you're doing this. And then I didn't want the mount in there. I didn't need that. that could be in the notes. So you could change this to where it can be included in the notes, or in the description, in other words. And then this background notes or anything would go over here on the right. So you don't want this stuff in the parsing area because it'll throw it off. So this is captain of the guard. And then over here is the actual notes. And, that's where you're going to put your images. And then up here where it says captain of the guard, I'm going to actually copy and paste that in. And then I can right click on here. You can either change it from here, or if you know the shortcuts, it's control 1 through 6. So control 2 is a header. Control 1 is just regular text, and so on and so forth. So when you get used to those, it makes this go faster. And then for background, I'm going to hit Control B, which is a bold. And then I'll leave this space in here because that's where I'll link the artwork once I get that stuff done. And then over here, if you want to clean up the text, you can right click and you can use this to kind of format this so that it comes out nicer. And by not having these spaces in here, it can throw off the parsing. So I have to kind of see what's going to happen. But I know that I've done this before enough times to know that this can be very problematic. So this is kind of the thing you're going to have to watch for. So I didn't format this properly. I kind of went through and used what ChatGPT gave me. But if you have a lot of extra spaces in there, you can right click and clean up the text. And if there's any extra spaces in there, Fantasy Grounds will do it. It'll do it automatically on import. But if you want to see the results, like how it's going to look, that's how you do it. And let me hit import and let's see what it does. So so far it looks right. But yeah, it kind of, let's see, did it do it right? Looks like it's okay. But yeah, see, it didn't put any of the saving throw stuff in there because it's all jacked up. So that's what I'm saying. Like, it did most of it right, but when it came to this part under the saving throws and stuff, it threw that off. So this is what I'm saying. If the formatting is wrong, it's not going to import correctly. So what I'm going to do is go back into ChatGPT and I'll pull up something that will be a little bit better, a little bit easier to work with. So that was kind of a test run that I did there just to show you the difference of how these things can impact your conversion and how annoying it can get. So this one, it did it, and look what it did. It put the stat block in the wrong configuration. So instead of putting all the numbers underneath the acronyms, it put it next to it. I didn't ask it to do that. So then I said, well, fix it, do this. And it says, okay. So now it did it, but it's still doing it the wrong way. So I'm like, come on. And this is the format that I wanted for the other stat block. So I had to fight with it for a while, but this is kind of the thing you're going to go through. And now that this is actually what I want right here. So this is a better, I want to say a better version of the stat block output. This is what you want. And you'll get used to this as you use the import tool. Now, let's remember that Pathfinder and other rule sets don't always have this type of tool. So, if you're doing Pathfinder or something, you might have to enter the stuff manually anyways. So this is just something that you're going to have to get used to. You're going to be fighting it. You're going to have to really understand how the tool works, or it's going to drive you nuts, or it's going to take you forever. So that's kind of why I'm doing it this way, is using ChatGPT to help me organize the content. So now that this looks better, this looks a lot closer to what I wanted, and I'm going to actually fix the background. I'm going to use the new background that the ChatGPT had done for me. So here's this here. So I'm just going to take that information and go back into Fantasy Grounds and paste that in there. And then you right click and you can go, that will clean up the text so you can get a look at it before you import. And then over here, I want to leave that space. So let's see what happens now. So yeah, this is way better. So as you can see, this stuff populated properly. So it gave it the trait and the 2 or 3 actions. And then on the back, you have this nice, beautiful summary. That's exactly what you want to see. So this is a step in the right direction for this particular project. So the other thing that will happen is once I'm done with all the NPCs and get all that done, then I have to go back and do all the artwork. So tokens and maps and images and all that stuff. So I'll probably do all the NPC artwork first. So that's tokens, full images, that sort of thing, if you're going to. And not everything needs a piece of art, but I definitely want a token. I don't want all letter tokens for everything. So I figure at least for the captain of the guard, I'd like to have a unique token. Maybe not for all the soldiers, we'll see. But nonetheless, this looks pretty good. And this is exactly what you want to see. So if you have older content, like older modules, you won't see this nice summary. You might get a picture and a title and then some lore, but you're not going to see this summary. The only way you get this summary like this is if you use the import tool in Fantasy Grounds, or if you know what you're doing on the back end, manipulating the XML data. But this is what you want. This is exactly what you want. And when you build your index, it'll look really nice and professional. So the other thing is that since Fantasy Grounds has changed, what you can do now is in books, this is where your reference manual is going to be. And when you go to build your reference manual, you're going to click on campaign and start a new reference manual. And you could drag over your stuff into here. But I'm not going to worry about that yet. I got a long ways to go. That would probably be the very end process, is to build all your chapters and the structure of the book. And then as you're building content for the story entries, this is a simple story entry, which is kind of like the older ones. And now you have this advanced one, which is where I'm going to be working at mostly. And this will show up in the reference manual. And this is where you can do the text blocks, where you can have the art on one side and chapter. You can have dual chapters, dual headings, so it looked just like the PDF. So that's kind of something that's kind of new if you haven't been using Fantasy Grounds in a while. So you kind of have a hybrid of a story entry and a reference manual. So that's something that's changed recently. So if you're in the middle of a project and you have this situation, I honestly don't know what to say, but it might be a problem. So you might have to go back and redo some of your work, especially if all your data entries are in this simple format. It's going to be a little bit difficult to create the reference manual if you don't go back and do some of this conversion work here. So yeah, I know. I don't know for sure. I could be wrong. But if you're in the middle of a big project, that might be a situation. So my earlier thing was to change, to have a separate account, one that's not attached to your games and stuff. It depends on what you're doing too. Like some people just need to edit a few things, which isn't easy. But if you're doing a huge project, I don't know, man. I don't envy you at all. I've been working on conversion for 5-ish years ago for Pathfinder Freeport, and I left it at, oh my God. You know what? If you could go back somehow, oh my God, that sucks. I don't know what to say, man. I feel for you. I'm not saying it's going to be messed up, but I am saying that you might have some work ahead of you. So I don't know what to say, because you're in the middle of a project and then Fantasy Grounds changes. That's when you can end up having to redo some stuff. Depends on what it is that you're working on. But when it comes to this index here, or the story, if you haven't made your what you call it, reference manual yet, that's probably a good thing, because then all you'd have to do is just copy and paste this stuff from simple stories into these advanced ones. You could do that. That wouldn't take too long. But if you've already got half of it built like that, oh my God, I don't know what to tell you. But anyway, so this is just something that has been changed recently. So I don't know what's happening, but there's been some problems with older legacy content. So if you're using a tool, like there was a tool that they use in the intermediary time when they were going from older story entries into the reference manual, they were using the author extension. I don't think you need that anymore. As a matter of fact, anything that was created with author might give you problems, meaning that it will be tough to go from that into the new format without having to redo it. And it has something to do with the way it indexes the chapters. You'll have to rebuild the reference manual if you want it to look like the newer content. Otherwise, it'll just display in this really basic way, like the old way. But that's up to you if you want to go down that road. But nonetheless, this is just a tool that you can use if you're using the 5th edition rule set, which is really handy. This will really cut down your time. This normally would have taken me, I'd still be working on it, put it that way, if I didn't have that tool. So unfortunately, some of the rule sets you still have to do it all by hand. So it really depends. And then you can always make a copy. So if you don't want to redo the whole thing, you can actually go into a module if you have anything loaded. Let's go to the bestiary, for instance. So in NPCs, I'm going back to the all category. So you can make a copy of any of these NPCs and then just edit that. You don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel. So if you wanted to, let's say you wanted to use this ape. Okay, this has 2 new tokens, by the way. But if you wanted to make a copy of this, you just copy that record, drop it back into the NPC records. And then what you do is you can see it does not attach to anything. So then you can open this up, unlock it, and then edit it the way you want. And then you can even change the information around however you want to do it. And if it's a proprietary creature, honestly, all you have to do is give it a different name, change a few little things around, and that's basically your own thing. So even if you have a monster that's part of the Wizards of the Coast or Paizo's exclusive monsters, or maybe it belongs to Kobold Press or something like that, all you have to do is probably change the artwork and change around a couple things, like the titles especially. And there are some spells and that sort of thing. But if that's the case, that's a lot easier to do than trying to monkey around with all, no pun intended, but no monkeying around with all the with all this stuff with importing and all that stuff. You can just make copies, and then what you do is once you have it edited to the way you want, then you can take this information or this copy and drag and drop it into your project. So if I wanted that ape to be in part of this, all I'd have to do is drop down this list, the master list. Here's the group that I made, and I'll take the copy of the ape and drag and drop it into that group. So now that ape is a part of my campaign, or will be when I export it. So that's how you move stuff around. Now, try not to link to the original source if you plan on exporting it and having it as an exclusive module. If you don't want it to rely on a bunch of other books, you need to consider that. So I usually make copies of everything, and that way, if a person buys the adventure, they don't necessarily have to load everything else. I don't mind if it relies on the SRD or the core rulebook, but when you have links that go to 50 books, and then someone buys a module and it goes, oh, you need this book, and no, you need that book, that gets pretty annoying. So I try not to do that in my conversions, whether it be for myself or for anyone else. I just want to load it. I don't want to load 100 books just to play it. So that's kind of where I'm at on that. So it's a little extra work, but I think it's worth it in the long run. So you can make copies of existing content and then drag it over into your project. So I'm actually going to right click and delete this. I don't need that. But if you want to clean that up, you got to go back into your list and right click and delete it. But in this case, I just wanted to show you that because that can be something that pisses you off later on. Or it could be something that opens your eyes and say, crap, I didn't know I could do that. Sometimes you can't unlock these creatures. In this case, you can because it's the SRD. But the monster manual, for example, may be locked and you can't do anything to it. So you'll have to make a copy first and then you edit the copy. So that's really what I wanted to cover in this particular video, is how to use the import tool, some considerations that you have to make if you're going to be building the content, and then some of the tools that I'm using to help speed this process up. So I'm going to do one more import. I'll kind of go over that, hopefully without not too much problem. So I want to make sure I'm back into my working group, which is the Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth NPCs. Now I'm going to open up this import text and go back to ChatGPT, which I'm using to kind of organize the content. So here's the captain of the guard. The next one is the mullah, which is like a cleric. So we'll see if this turned out. So it looks right so far. So I'm going to copy and paste this content here. And I don't like this part here. It doesn't need those bullet points, but we'll see if it actually takes that or not. So I'm just going to grab the stat block stuff and the actions. I don't need the notes yet. I'll put that in after. So we'll put the mullah in here. This is your cleric or priest or wise man. And in Fantasy Grounds, I'm going to do a Control V as in Victor. And I think it ignored those, so that's good. But you didn't want a dash or a space in there. That could be problematic. So I'm going to right click and go to clean up text. So this is what it looks like without all the spaces in there. And then on the right hand side, I'm going to put, I always copy the name. And then I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm going to do the background. So this is basically the step. So I'm going to go ahead and format this. I'm going to leave that space in here so that later on, if I want to link something in there, I can. It'd be nice if I had all that done. I can do it now. I can link everything in there. So that's a consideration when you're building. Be more efficient to do it that way. If you had all your artwork ready to go, you can link it now and not have to worry about it later. But I'm going to have to go in and crack each one of these open later and insert it. And then for the import, let's see what happens. So I'm going to kind of look it over really quick. It looks right. So I'm going to hit import. And let's see what we got. Yep, it did the spellcasting trait. It added the mace. This looks correct. And one of the things you can do as you go, make it simpler on yourself, is you want to put these NPCs in the combat tracker so you can test them out. So I'm going to drag and drop. This is a spellcaster, so that's why I do this, because the spellcasters often get jacked up. So I'm going to go over to the offense, which is their attack. So you can double click on these. It looks like I have it on manual dice rolls. I think I was testing out some tables. So I'm going to turn that off. There we go. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the attack roll. It looks right. I rolled a 1. Wonderful. And the damage. Yep. And then you want to look at some of these spells. So here's a saving throw. Here's an effect. Here's a heal. Yeah, so this was kind of, you just do a preliminary check to make sure that it's right. And now that it is, I'm just going to go ahead and delete this off there and I'll move on to the next one. So this is the process. So you go through, get all of your text situated so that when you, like when you're getting ready to create something, or, as you go, test the stuff out so it's not all busted up, but then also get all your text kind of fixed first, and then use the import tool, and then go and test them out, and then check if you're going to use the art, bring the art over. Like I said, if I had the artwork now, I would already link it here. The only problem is that if you have a problem and you have to delete it and start over, that's kind of a wasted step. So it's kind of up to you how you want to do it. But this is just the kind of the process that I would use for a big project. Now, if I only had one NPC, I would just build it from scratch. Who cares, right? One isn't going to kill you. But if you've got more than a couple, more than like 2 or 3, that import tool saves you a lot of time. And I know that some of you have built NPCs and it takes a while. Certain rule sets take a lot more time to do. So, you know, I don't know what to say. The tools are not available in every rule set. If you keep the file name the same and update it down the line, it would update every. No, it doesn't. It doesn't do that. What I had found is that you have to update the NPC. So if you change all that stuff, you're going to have to relink it, and that's a pain in the butt. But and on top of that, they're going to a WebP format or WebM or whatever, WebP. So if you change all that out, you're going to have to go in and reassociate all that stuff, and it's not going to go all the way through. Even if it was the same image, it's not going to do that. It doesn't. I don't know why, but it just doesn't have the logic to go through and update it. So if you have an encounter that you made before and you already got something attached to it and you need to change that something, you got to go all the way back to the beginning and change it all the way through. So you might have a story entry that has the encounter, and in that encounter is the NPC. So you're going to have to update the NPC, update the encounter, and update the link for the actual adventure. Otherwise, it might break somewhere, and that's something I've ran into before too. So you got to be careful with that. So that's a good point. Glad you brought that up, because if you build something, let's say you have an adventure and there's an encounter and you have that linked to the story entry, if you change the encounter, you just have to update the link in the story. However, if you change the NPC in the encounter, you have to update that and you have to relink it, because it may break the relationship between those two. It's kind of like a temporary thing on the encounters until you know, everything has to be linked up. And I think that's what you're asking. I think. And I think that's an important thing to know. So if you don't move your artwork around, so if you have a folder and it has a bunch of artwork, make sure you rename all that stuff and organize it. That way, if you figure down the road, yeah, there was a link checker tool. Yeah, I think so, but I don't know if that was for that reason or not. I don't remember, but I think it did look for dead links. So that might have been something that, I don't know if it still works now. It might have to be updated because of all the changes, but you'd think that the link tool would be all right. Yeah, I think there was one on the Forge. That's right. It's so they can check for dead links. That's exactly what it is. But I haven't used it in quite a while. But I just know that I'm not gonna check for dead links unless I go back and do the work, because whether it detects it or not, it still have to fix it. So I'm gonna go back and do it right and just fix them all and not worry about the link checker unless I miss one or something. But it will save you time. So you know, it depends. It really depends on. I think in your case, since you're 95% done, you probably want to use it because there's probably too many things to check. But anyways, this is just a NPC section of this. So next episode, I think I'm going to get into the artwork, making the tokens. And there is a new updated artwork parameters for the new, 600 pages. Yeah, that's a lot. So if you use the Atlassian Developers Guide, it's going to give you the parameters, or at least the suggested content for you know, basically for using Fantasy Grounds. So the Atlassian Guide is basically a tool that you want to use when you're doing conversions So it's over here on the left in content, and you want to go to developer guide, and then you want to go to the product guidelines. And this is going to give you an idea of the sizes that you want to use for a given project. So they've updated this recently. So the flat token, which is this here, is going to use the standard token sizing. So 256 for small and medium, and 512 for large and greater. Okay, the full body images have other specs. So in this case, this camera token is actually a lot bigger. So you're going to use, like, let's say for this, it's going to be 1K. So that would be about 1,000, 1,000 by 1,000 pixels for like a transparent creature, something that's going to be embedded in a reference manual. And in this case, you're going to be using it on the maps, the 2D maps. So that's another image. So that might just be resizing it. And then this full body image is when you're going to be zooming in on it. So that's 2K by 2K. And this would be meant to be shown separately and zoomed in. So maybe it's a map or some sort of, maybe it's a handout or something, but that's this full body image. So this is what's changed with like NPCs and players and such, is you're going to have a full body image for the artwork to kind of show people. You're going to have a token just for like the 2D map, for basically just for moving around on the grid. And then you're going to have this token camera view, which is going to be a larger image so that it will look better on the map or in the 2D or 3D mode. So that's just something that has changed recently. So if you're going to create content, make sure you refer to this. So this is in the developer's guide, and then you go to the product guidelines, and you come down here and you cross-reference here. It'll tell you what size, what format, what high quality, that sort of thing. So that pertains to when you're doing conversions. And there's some other notes down here as well. So make sure you look at those if you're doing official conversions, or if you want your module to not be too large, because that's what ends up happening is, you have a couple tokens, not bad. But when you start having, 100 tokens, the size of that starts adding up. Same thing with maps. You might have like one big map, that might be okay, but once you have like 6 or 7 of those and you have those shared, or you have it in a module, the size of that gets pretty big. And also the biggest mistake that most people make is the resolution, or the dimension. So you don't want a huge map, because that really messes with Fantasy Grounds, especially with this new camera mode. I've seen people on the forums with huge maps, and they're like over 8K or whatever in dimensions. So they're just huge, and they're made for printing, not for using in the virtual tabletop. I don't think people understand that, but when you have an image that's over 2K in size, you're kind of gambling with the idea that the file is going to be large, which takes room on your hard drive. It takes time to transfer that information from your players to your table and back and forth. But the worst case scenario is that it's just too much for it to hold in RAM. So if you have your video card and your processor, it's really hard on it when you've got a large image that has to be displayed in that high of definition. So 4K is the absolute maximum. And a lot of the images I've seen where people have complained about Fantasy Grounds sucking or not working, they're over this amount. They're like way, they're not even close to that. So they're actually images that are probably purchased at a third-party website that's made for printing. So when you're going to print like a PDF or print a map out, you have to have a 300 DPI image with a larger format for print. But in Fantasy Grounds or any virtual tabletop, to be honest with you, you don't need these huge whopping files, especially if it's only for display. So pay attention to that, because that's something that creeps up on you. And if you've made a whole bunch of images and then they have different file names, like I had a token that was, Green Ronin made smaller maps for, that's pretty decent. Like The main full map is 6. Yeah, that's a little big. They want it under 10. If you can do that, like under 5. So that's about almost double the size. So that's a little big. But if it's only going to be used to like display and not have line of sight, and you're not going to have players on it and such, then that's probably all right. I don't know. But when you put it in WebP format, that'll probably bring the size down as far as file size. But the dimensions are way too big. I think that's almost double. Or it could be wrong. I don't know. But if you keep your maps around 2K and lower, you'll be fine. But you start going beyond that, that's when things get a little dicey. But anyways, it just depends on what you're doing, and what your strength of your internet and all that good stuff. But anyway, so this is just a heads up, you guys, because this can be annoying. Oh yeah, here it is. Here's the conversion checker, the properties inspector. I don't think that linker thing is available anymore, to be honest. I think they took that down. So that was the anonymous linker. So I don't know. Anyways, you guys take care. That's the end of the stream for now. Next time I come back next Friday, I'll go over images. We'll make some tokens, and we'll talk about this stuff a little bit more in depth. But that's kind of what we're going to be doing next time. So we'll go over images and how to do all that. Yeah, no problem, man. Good luck, and yeah, no problem, Simbarchi. We'll see you around, man. And congrats on winning the rule set, by the way. But anyways, take care, folks. You guys have a wonderful day, and have a good weekend, and I'll see you.